She didn't scream. That was the thing nobody understood later, when they asked her what happened in that back hallway of the Silver Crown Saloon when a man twice her size had her pinned against the wall with one hand around her wrist and the other pressed flat against the door so she couldn't run. She didn't scream, because she had learned after 2 years of being followed that screaming only made him angrier. So she went still. She went cold. And she prayed that someone, anyone, was watching. Someone was. If this story already has your heart beating faster, subscribe to this channel and follow every part to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. She survived by going quiet, but the man in the corner office had already seen too much. Copper Ridge, Colorado Territory, 1883. Her name was Nora Calloway. And the first thing most people noticed about her was that she moved through a room like she was trying not to exist in it. Not because she was timid, not because she lacked confidence, but because 2 years of being watched had taught her that the best way to stay safe was to stay invisible. She was 29 years old. She worked as a bookkeeper at the Silver Crown Saloon and Hotel, the largest establishment in Copper Ridge, a mining town built on copper ore whiskey money, and the ambitions of men who believed the West belonged to whoever was willing to take it. She kept the ledgers clean. She tracked every dollar that came through the Silver Crown's doors, gambling receipts, room rentals, liquor invoices, payroll for the staff. She was good at numbers. She always had been. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't change their story, depending on who was listening. Numbers told you exactly what they were, and they stayed that way. People were different. People could smile at your face and sharpen a knife behind their back. Nora had learned that lesson the hard way. His name was Roy Briggs. She had met him 3 years ago when she first arrived in Copper Ridge, a widow's daughter from Kansas, looking for honest work in a town that needed someone who could count. Roy had been charming then. Broad shoulders, easy smile, always the first man to hold a door or tip his hat. He had seemed safe. That was the word she kept coming back to even now, even after everything. Safe. She had trusted him for almost a year before the first sign came that something was wrong. It started small. The way he showed up at her boarding house without warning. The way he asked the landlady questions about her schedule. The way he appeared at the market, at the post office, at the church steps on Sunday morning, always with that same easy smile, always with a reason that sounded reasonable, until you lined them all up together and realized there were too many coincidences for any of them to be accidents. She had tried to end things gently. He hadn't accepted gentle. She had tried to end things directly. He hadn't accepted that either. She had gone to the sheriff. The sheriff had listened politely, nodded slowly, and told her that Roy Briggs hadn't broken any laws he could see, and that maybe she ought to be a little more careful about encouraging men if she didn't want the attention. She had walked out of that office and understood something that settled in her chest like cold iron. Nobody was going to help her. She would have to survive this herself. So she had learned to be invisible. She tracked his patterns the way she tracked numbers methodically without sentiment. She knew which days he visited the Silver Crown for a drink. She knew which routes he walked through town. She arranged her own movements to avoid his slipping out side doors, crossing the street half a block early, timing her lunch hour to the minute. For 8 months, it had worked. For 8 months, she had managed to keep enough distance between them that she could almost breathe normally. Then 3 weeks ago, he had been hired as a freight handler for the mining company that supplied the Silver Crown. Which meant he now had a reason to be in the building. Which meant the careful architecture of her invisible life had collapsed. The back hallway of the Silver Crown ran behind the kitchen and the storage rooms connecting the main floor to the delivery entrance where the freight came through. Nora used it every morning to reach the office where she kept her ledgers. It was faster than going through the main saloon floor, and it was usually empty at the hour she arrived, just past 7, before most of the staff showed up. She had been careful for 3 weeks. She had varied her timing. She had started using the front entrance twice a week just to disrupt any pattern he might be tracking. But on a Tuesday morning in October, she made a mistake. She came in early. She was behind on the month-end accounts, and she wanted 2 quiet hours before anyone arrived. She pushed through the delivery entrance at 6:30, her leather satchel over one shoulder, her mind already running through the numbers she needed to reconcile. She was 3 steps into the hallway when the door behind her opened again. She didn't turn around immediately. She heard the latch click. She heard footsteps. And something in the base of her spine went cold before her mind had finished recognizing what her body already knew. Nora. His voice, low, conversational, the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. She kept walking. Nora, I know you hear me. She reached for the handle of the office door. Locked. She had forgotten Mrs. Hale, the head housekeeper, who kept the key, didn't arrive until 7. Roy's hand closed around her wrist before she could turn, not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to hold. We need to talk, he said. She turned then, because she had learned that turning away from him made things worse. She looked at him directly, kept her voice flat. Let go of my wrist, Roy. I just want to talk. I've told you there's nothing to talk about. I don't think that's true. He wasn't smiling now. The easy charm was gone, and what was underneath it was something she recognized and feared a certainty. A sense of ownership so complete that he didn't even seem to notice it as something unusual. You've been avoiding me. Release my wrist. You've been going out of your way to avoid me for months, Nora. I think after everything there is no everything. She kept her voice from shaking by concentrating on keeping it flat. There was nothing. It ended. That was 2 years ago. You ended it. Yes. You didn't give me a reason. I gave you several. You gave me excuses. His grip tightened slightly. Not much. Just enough to remind her. I want a real conversation. I want you to look at me and tell me honestly. Roy. She looked at him directly. If you do not release my arm in the next 3 seconds, I will scream loud enough to bring everyone in this building into this hallway. He studied her face, and then something shifted in his expression. Something that made her stomach drop, because it wasn't fear, and it wasn't backing down. It was amusement. You won't scream, he said. He said it the way someone states a fact they've verified. You never scream. I have noticed that about you, Nora. You go quiet when you're scared. You've been going quiet for 2 years, and nobody's noticed because you're so good at it. Her throat closed, because he was right. She hadn't screamed, not once, not in 2 years. She had gone quiet and invisible and careful, and all of it had taught him one thing, that she was his to corner, I think, Roy said, leaning slightly closer, that you and I are going to talk right here, right now, and you're going to take your hand off of her. The voice came from the far end of the hallway. Quiet. Completely calm. The kind of calm that had nothing to do with peace, and everything to do with a man who had decided how this situation was going to end before he opened his mouth. Both Nora and Roy turned. A man stood at the hallway entrance that connected to the saloon's main floor, a door that was almost never used at this hour. He was tall, somewhere in his early 40s, with dark hair that had gone silver at the temples, and the kind of face that had been weathered by years of hard decisions rather than hard weather. He was dressed well, not ostentatiously, no gold watch chain, no embroidered vest, but the quality of his coat was unmistakable, the kind of fabric that didn't come from the general store in Copper Ridge. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't reaching for anything. He didn't need to. This is a private conversation, Roy said. He hadn't released Nora's wrist. The man in the doorway looked at Roy the way a rancher looks at something that has wandered onto his land. No, he said. It's not. Who the hell are you? I'm the man who owns this building. A pause. Which means everything that happens in this hallway is my business. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Nora counted them. Roy's grip on her wrist loosened. Not all the way, not immediately, but she felt the shift the moment his certainty cracked just enough to let doubt in. Garrett Cole. Roy said. It wasn't a greeting. It was recognition. And underneath the recognition was something Nora had never heard in Roy Briggs's voice in 3 years of knowing him. Wariness. "That's right," the man said. Roy released her wrist. He stepped back, straightened his coat, and then, incredibly, he attempted to smile. "I didn't know you were in the building, Mr. Cole." "I'm aware. The lady and I were just... I heard what you were doing." Garrett Cole took 3 steps down the hallway. Not aggressive, measured. The way a man moves when he doesn't need to prove anything by rushing. "And I heard what you said to her." Roy's jaw tightened. It was a private conversation. In my building. Cole stopped at a distance that was close enough to be deliberate, and far enough that Roy couldn't call it physical. "With my employee." He looked at Roy steadily. "You have freight to unload. I suggest you go do that." The moment stretched. Nora was watching Roy's face because Roy's face was the thing she had learned to watch most carefully in 2 years. She saw the calculation happen, the weighing of options, the measuring of risk. And then she watched him decide. He nodded once, looked at Nora, and then he walked past both of them toward the delivery entrance, without another word. The door swung shut behind him. For a moment neither Nora nor Garrett Cole spoke. Then she heard herself say quietly, and without planning to, "Thank you." He looked at her. His expression was difficult to read, not unkind, but not soft either. Something in between, something that reminded her of the way a doctor looks at a patient whose chart he's only just been handed. "Has he done this before?" Cole asked. Nora considered the question. She considered giving the answer she usually gave, the careful one, the invisible one, the one that kept things simple and didn't ask anything of anyone. Then she said, "Yes." "How long?" 2 years. Something in his expression shifted, very slightly. "And you've spoken to the sheriff?" It wasn't entirely a question. "Once," she said. It didn't help. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does anyone here know? Anyone on the staff?" "No." "Why not?" She looked at him directly. "Because the last time I told someone he heard about it and it made things worse. And because..." She stopped. "Because," he prompted, "because people look at a woman who's been followed for 2 years and they start to wonder what she did to cause it." She kept her voice even. "I've found it's easier to handle it quietly." Garrett Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me." His office was on the top floor of the Silver Crown, a room she had known existed but had never entered. The stairs to it ran up from behind the main bar, past a landing, where 2 men she recognized as Cole's associates stood with the careful posture of people paid to notice things. They both looked at her when she came up the stairs behind Cole. Neither said anything. The office was large with wide windows that looked down onto the main street of Copper Ridge. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, covered in Ledger's correspondence territorial maps, with notations she couldn't read from where she stood. Cole gestured to a chair. She sat. He remained standing, which she found she didn't mind. It meant she could see him clearly, and she had learned to prefer having a clear line of sight. "Tell me his name," Cole said. "Roy Briggs. He was recently hired as a freight handler for Delaney Mining, I know." He had moved to the window. "I know most of the people who work in or around this building. Miss Calloway. Nora Calloway." "Miss Calloway." He turned from the window. "You've been my bookkeeper for how long?" 14 months. "In 14 months you have never once turned in a ledger with an error." She blinked. "I know. I haven't. I've noticed." He said it simply, without emphasis. "I notice most things that happen in this building. It's a habit." He paused. "I should have noticed what was happening in that hallway before this morning." The directness of it surprised her. Not an apology, not exactly, but an acknowledgement of a failure without deflection. She hadn't expected that. "It wasn't," she started. "It was preventable," he said without heat. "And I intend to prevent it from happening again." She looked at him carefully. "What does that mean?" It means Roy Briggs will be removed from his contract with Delaney Mining by end of day. It means he will not set foot in this building again. A pause. And it means I want to understand exactly how serious this situation is. She studied him. Garrett Cole was not a man who needed to be studied. To be understood, he was in the way of very few people she had ever met, almost entirely transparent in the ways that mattered. Not soft, not simple, but clear. What he meant he said, what he said he meant. She had met very few people like that. Most people, in her experience, wrapped their intentions in layers in charm or in apology, or in the language of concern that was really the language of curiosity, or the language of judgment wearing a friendly face. Cole was none of those things. He was looking at her like a problem that needed to be solved correctly, and somehow that was less frightening than being looked at like a victim. 2 years ago, she said, I was working at a hotel in a town called Salida. I met Roy Briggs there. We spoke a handful of times. I thought he seemed decent. She paused. I allowed him to call on me twice. It became clear he wasn't what I thought. I ended it. He didn't agree that it was ended. He followed you here. He followed me to 2 towns before this one. When I moved, he found me both times. How? I don't know. I've been careful about where I send letters, about who I tell. She looked down at her hands. He's resourceful. He's patient. He's very good at seeming normal to everyone who isn't me. The sheriff called it a misunderstanding. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Who else have you told? You're the 3rd person I've told total, in 2 years. He was quiet for a moment. What happened to the other 2? The first was the sheriff in Salida. He gave me advice similar to what the sheriff here gave me. She kept her voice level. The second was a woman I was friendly with in Pueblo. She mentioned it to someone she trusted, and Roy heard about it within a week and came to my door that night. The silence in the room was different after that. Not uncomfortable, but weighted. Cole sat down at the edge of his desk, not behind it, but on the corner of it, which somehow made the conversation feel less like a hearing and more like an exchange. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable. All right. Are you afraid right now, in this moment? She considered the question seriously. No, she said. Why not? She looked at him. Because you're not Roy. Something shifted in his expression again, that slight movement she was starting to learn to read. What does that mean? Roy smiles when he wants something. He's warm and easy and comfortable right up until he thinks he has you where he wants you, and then he shows you the other thing underneath. She paused. You haven't smiled at all. You said what you meant. You're angry on my behalf, but you're not performing the anger, you're actually angry. She held his gaze. That's different. I trust different. Garrett Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. My mother left my father when I was 12 years old because of a man who seemed decent. She spent 4 years trying to get anyone to believe her that he wasn't. Nora went very still. I couldn't help her then, Cole said. I was a boy, and he was a grown man, and the law didn't care. A pause. I'm not a boy anymore. The thing about those words was that they weren't meant to be moving. They were stated plainly without inflection, the way he stated everything as a fact. Among facts, a piece of information offered to explain a position. But something about the plainness of them was more moving than any performance of feeling could have been. What are you going to do? Nora asked. I told you. Briggs loses his contract. He loses access to this building. And if he comes within sight of you, I want to know immediately. And if that doesn't stop him? It won't be enough on its own, Cole said without pretending otherwise. Men like him don't stop because one door closes. They look for another door. He was quiet for a moment. But I have resources the sheriff doesn't, and I have patience. He looked at her steadily. So does he. So we'll need to be smarter. We? She said. You're my bookkeeper, Miss Calloway. What happens to you in this building is my responsibility." He paused. "Unless you'd prefer I stay out of it." She thought about that. She thought about 2 years of handling it alone. She thought about the careful, invisible architecture she had built, and how completely it had failed that morning. She thought about the feeling of Roy's hand on her wrist and the 7 words that had made it stop. "Take your hand off of her." "No," she said. "No. I don't want you to stay out of it." He nodded once. "Then we'll deal with it together." Sud. Roy Briggs was released from his freight contract that afternoon. She knew because she heard it from Mrs. Hale, who heard it from the stable hand, who heard it from the Delaney mining foreman, who had apparently been informed quite directly that the arrangement was ending effective immediately and that no explanation was owed. By the time the sun started dropping behind the mountains, the Silver Crown staff had a story, partial imprecise but directionally correct, about something happening in the back hallway that morning. She didn't confirm or deny it. She sat at her desk and worked through the month-end accounts with the same careful precision she always brought to numbers. But when she walked home that evening through streets turning amber in the late light, she was aware of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She wasn't scanning for Roy. She was just walking. The awareness of that, the simple fact of moving through a public street without tracking every shadow and doorway, was so unfamiliar that she stopped for a moment on the corner of 3rd and Main and simply stood there, feeling the evening air on her face. She didn't let herself believe it was over. She had enough experience to know that a single intervention didn't end something that had built itself over 2 years. She knew Roy well enough to know he would regroup, recalibrate, find another angle. She knew the door that had just closed would make him look for another one. But tonight, just tonight, she let herself have the feeling. She let herself feel what it was like to have someone stand between her and the thing she feared. She let herself feel what it was like to not be alone in it. And walking home in the amber light of a Colorado October evening, Nora Calloway realized something she hadn't let herself think about in a long time. She was still here. She had survived 2 years of being hunted and invisible and disbelieved. She had survived this morning, and something had changed, not in Roy, not yet. Not in the way that would matter, but in something smaller and more personal. Something that had been locked down tight inside her since the first night she had understood what Roy Briggs really was. For the first time in 2 years, she had told the truth to someone who had listened, and he had not made her pay for it. 3 blocks away in the top-floor office of the Silver Crown, Garrett Cole stood at his window and watched the street below with the particular attention of a man who makes his business knowing what is happening around him. He had made 2 decisions that day. One was about Roy Briggs. The other one, quieter, less defined, the kind of decision a man makes before he's fully aware he's making. It was about the woman who had looked at him and said simply, "You're not Roy." He hadn't told many people about his mother. He wasn't sure what had made him say it. He was sure of very few things in that moment, which was an unusual feeling for a man who prided himself on certainty. He turned away from the window and sat at his desk. He looked at the ledgers that needed his attention. He thought about a woman who had survived 2 years without help because she'd learned that asking for it made things worse. And Garrett Cole, who had built half the commerce of Copper Ridge on the principle of knowing exactly what every move would cost before he made it, found himself for the first time in longer than he could remember making a move without knowing the price. He pulled a sheet of paper toward him. He began to write. The evening deepened around him. Outside Copper Ridge settled into its nighttime sounds, the distant music from the saloon below, the creak of wagons on the main road, the wind coming down off the mountains. And somewhere in that ordinary night, Roy Briggs was calculating. Cole knew it with the certainty of a man who had spent his life reading people. Roy Briggs was not finished. He was only beginning. And Garrett Cole, for the first time in 10 years, intended to be ready for someone else, besides himself. The letter arrived at Nora's boarding house on Thursday morning. No envelope, no postmark. Someone had slid it directly under her door sometime in the night. She found it when she stepped out of bed at 6 o'clock, still half asleep, reaching for her boots. The folded paper was sitting against the baseboard, like it had always been there. She stood very still for a moment. Then she picked it up. The handwriting was Roy's. She recognized it the way you recognize the sound of a floorboard that always creaks in the same spot. Not because you've studied it, but because your body has memorized the warning. It said only. You made a mistake, Nora. I hope you understand that now. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it in the inside pocket of her satchel, and went to work. She did not allow herself to think about it on the walk to the Silver Crown. She thought about the accounts instead. She thought about the payroll figures she needed to finish before noon. She counted her steps and matched them to numbers in her head, the way she had learned to do when she needed her mind to stay on the ground, instead of spinning into the place where the fear lived. She was good at that. She had gotten very good at that. Cole was already in the building when she arrived. She knew because the two men from the landing she had learned their names by now. Douglas and Pierce were standing at the base of the main stairs rather than the top, which meant someone important was moving between floors. Cole himself appeared at the top of the staircase just as she was taking off her coat. He looked at her face and stopped. "What happened?" he said. She had not planned to tell him immediately. She had planned to settle in review. Her numbers determine whether the letter was significant enough to bring forward, or whether she was simply reacting to the particular exhaustion of being a person who had been afraid for 2 years. But he had looked at her face and asked a direct question, and she had learned the previous day that Garrett Cole was someone who deserved direct answers. She opened her satchel and handed him the letter. He read it once. His expression didn't change outwardly, not in any dramatic way, but something in the quality of his stillness shifted, the way a river shifts when there's something moving beneath the surface. "When did you find this?" "This morning, sometime in the night under my door." "Mrs. Chandler's boarding house on Elm." "Yes." "He knows where you live." "He's always known where I live." She said it simply because it was simply true. Finding where I live has never been the difficulty. The difficulty is that knowing where someone lives isn't a crime. Cole looked at the letter again. Then he folded it and put it in his coat pocket. "I need you to tell me everything you know about how he finds you," he said. "Not generally, specifically. Every detail you've noticed in 2 years." She thought of all the times she had wanted someone to ask her exactly that question. The time she had rehearsed the answer in her head during the long evenings at her boarding house desk, laying out the pattern, the way she'd lay out a column of figures methodically looking for the logic underneath the apparent chaos. "All right," she said. They sat in his office for an hour. She talked. He listened without interrupting, which was rare enough that she noticed it. He made occasional notes, short ones more like marks than words on a sheet of paper, and twice he asked a clarifying question that cut directly to something she hadn't realized was significant until he pointed at it. "You said he found you in Pueblo within 3 weeks of you arriving." "Yes." "And in Salida, you'd been there 4 months before he appeared." "Yes." "What was different about Pueblo?" She frowned. I'm not sure what you mean." "You were more careful in Pueblo than Salida, you said. You didn't use your full name. You sent fewer letters." "I only told one person where I was going." "Who?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "My former employer in Salida," she said slowly. "I gave him a forwarding address for my final wages." Cole looked at her steadily. "He worked with the mining consortium," she said, the pieces assembling themselves as she spoke, the way numbers assembled themselves when the right variable finally came clear. Roy drove freight for the same consortium. So Roy had access to employer correspondence. "I never thought—" She stopped. "I thought I'd been so careful." "You were careful," Cole said. "You just didn't know where the gap was." He put down his pen. "Now we know." She looked at him. "But he already knows I'm here." "Yes. The question now is what his next move is." "The letter is the next move. He wants me to know that losing the freight contract didn't stop him." Right. So what comes after the letter? She had thought about this. She had spent 2 years thinking about Roy's patterns with the same obsessive attention she gave to numbers, and she had identified the rhythm of it. First, he establishes contact, then he escalates proximity. Then he creates a situation in which she has to interact with him directly. And once he has her in that direct interaction, he starts working on the isolation, the gradual erosion of whatever stability she's built. She told Cole all of it. He listened to every word. When she finished, he said, "He's systematic." Yes. That's useful, actually. Systematic people are predictable. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she had been living inside the terror of that system for 2 years. And no one had ever looked at it from that angle, not as a source of fear, but as a source of information. "What I need," Cole said, "is to make sure he can't get to the next stage. The proximity stage. Right, which means understanding what doors are still open to him in this town." He paused. "I removed one access point. He'll look for others." "He's resourceful," she said. "That's the thing people always underestimate about him. He seems like a simple man. He's not." "I'm aware." A pause. "He's been asking around about you." She went still. "What?" "Since yesterday. One of my people heard it at the feed store this morning. He's been asking questions about your background, how long you've been in Copper Ridge, who you know, where you came from before here." Cole's voice was level. "He's building a picture." "He already has a picture. He's had one for 2 years. He's building a new one that includes me." Cole picked up his pen again. "Which means he's trying to understand whether I'm a real obstacle or whether he can root around me." The bluntness of it landed oddly not cold but precise, like a compass bearing, uncomfortable to look at directly and necessary to know. "And are you," she asked, "a real obstacle?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why she had known this man for less than 24 hours, and she had learned in 3 years of hard education that the men most likely to say, "Yes, I'll protect you," were often the same men who found reasons to step aside when the protection became inconvenient. But something about the way Garrett Cole said yes was different from the way other men said it. Other men said it like a promise. He said it like a fact, and she had always trusted facts more than promises. The shift happened the following Monday. Nora arrived at work to find a young woman sitting in the main saloon with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting long enough to become visibly unhappy about it. She was perhaps 19 years old, with red hair pinned too tightly and a dress that had been pressed with more care than money could account for. "Miss Calloway," she said, standing immediately. "I'm Pearl Hensley. My brother Earl works the bar on weeknights. He said Mr. Cole is hiring for a cleaning position, and I should come in Monday morning." Nora glanced up toward the landing where Douglas was watching the exchange with the blank professional attention she had come to associate with him. "I'll let someone know you're here," she said. She went upstairs. Cole was at his desk reading something. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "There's a young woman downstairs," Nora said. "Pearl Hensley. Says she's here about a cleaning position." "I know." He set down the paper. "I asked her to come in." "You're hiring?" "I'm reshuffling." He folded his hands on the desk. "I'm adding staff whose primary job is visibility." She looked at him for a moment. "You're adding people to watch the building. I'm adding people who have a legitimate reason to be in every part of this building at every hour," he said, "and who will notice if someone is present who shouldn't be." It was so methodical that for a second she felt the particular dizziness of realizing someone else was applying the same obsessive logic to her safety that she had been applying alone for 2 years. "You can't staff a hotel around one woman's problem," she said. "I'm staffing it around a gap in security I should have addressed before now." He met her eyes. The two things happened to coincide. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. "I told you. You're my employee. What happens? In your building is your responsibility. Yes." She kept her gaze steady. That's the official answer. I'm asking for the real one. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, My mother's name was Catherine. She died when I was 22. She never fully recovered from the years of it the following. The cornering the way it made her small, when she had never been small before in her life. He paused. She was the sharpest person I knew. She could read a room the way you read a ledger, and it took something like Roy Briggs 8 years to chip that down to almost nothing. Nora didn't speak. I won't watch it happen to someone else, Cole said. Not in a building I own. Not while I have the means to prevent it. She nodded slowly. She didn't say I'm sorry about your mother because it would have been inadequate, and he wasn't asking for it. She didn't say thank you because she had already said it, and he had already moved past it. She said, What do you need from me? Something in his face shifted so briefly she almost missed it. Something that looked for just a moment like relief. I need you to tell me immediately if you receive anything else from him. Letters, sightings, anything. No matter how small. All right. And I need you to change your route to work. I've already done that. Every day. Different path. Every day, she agreed. One more thing. He hesitated, and the hesitation was notable because Cole did not habitually hesitate. I'd like you to move boarding houses. She blinked. Why? Because he slid a letter under your door in the night, and neither Mrs. Chandler nor any of her other boarders noticed anyone in the hall. Which means either he has access you don't know about, or he has someone inside the house who... No. The word came out sharper than she intended. I've lived at Mrs. Chandler's for 14 months. I'm not suggesting she's helping him intentionally. Cole was careful with his voice. I'm suggesting she's a woman who trusts people easily, and whose house may be easier to access than either of you realizes. She thought about it. She thought about Mrs. Chandler, warm, gray-haired, always smelling of cinnamon and slightly deaf in her right ear. The kind of woman who held the door for strangers and offered them tea before she'd checked whether they had a reason to be there. The kind of woman Roy Briggs was very good at charming. Where would I go? She asked. There's a room in this building. She looked at him. The Silver Crown has 8 rooms above the 3rd floor that aren't used as guest quarters, he said. Staff rooms originally. 2 are furnished. I use one when I work late into the night and don't want to make the ride back to my property. He paused. The other is empty. You're asking me to live at my place of work. I'm asking you to live in a building with Douglas and Pierce on the landing every night, and 4 other staff members within calling distance. He held her gaze. It's not a permanent arrangement, just until we understand what Briggs is planning next. She thought about her room at Mrs. Chandler's. The soft quilt. The window that looked out over the elm trees. The sense of home she had carefully built into 14 months of small routines. She thought about a folded piece of paper under her door. You made a mistake, Nora. I hope you understand that now. I'll move this week, she said. She moved on Wednesday. She didn't take everything, just the essentials, a single trunk, her books, her work materials. She left the rest in her room at Mrs. Chandler's for now, with a story about needing to be closer to the office for a period of heavy accounting work, which was true enough that she didn't feel dishonest saying it. Mrs. Chandler hugged her and said she hoped everything was all right, and sent her off with a wrapped loaf of bread. Nora walked the 6 blocks to the Silver Crown, with her trunk loaded onto a cart, and when she came up the back stairs with Douglas helping with the heavier pieces, and Pierce standing at the top of the landing with his usual expression of professional detachment, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not safe, not yet, but less alone. That was different from safe. It was smaller, maybe more provisional. But she had been alone in this for 2 years, and less alone was something she hadn't realized she'd been hungry for until she had a small portion of it. The room was simple. A bed, a washstand, a table, a window that looked out over the back alley. Less charming than Mrs. Chandler's, more defensible. She unpacked her books and her work materials first, then the quilt, which she had brought after all. When she was done, she sat at the small table and looked at the room. Then she opened her ledger and went back to work. Roy Briggs didn't make another direct move for 11 days. She counted them. She was aware of him in the peripheral way she had learned the occasional sighting on the main street. The sense of a figure at a distance that her body registered before her mind did the slightly too long pause at the corner of 3rd and Main. When she was crossing that, she noticed from the window. She reported all of it to Cole. He listened, made his notes, said very little. But things were happening that she wasn't always directly aware of. She knew because of the changes in the texture of daily life at the Silver Crown, small adjustments in who was present where and when in which doors were left unlocked, versus locked in the routes the cleaning staff took through the building. She noticed it the way she noticed discrepancies in ledgers, not as a dramatic shift, but as a pattern of small changes that added up to something intentional. And something else was happening too. Something quieter. She and Cole were spending more time in the same room. Not deliberately, or at least not obviously deliberately. She needed to ask him questions about the accounts. He needed to review financial reports she prepared. There were ordinary reasons to be in the same space at the same time. But the conversations that started with ledgers didn't always end with ledgers. He told her one evening when they were both working late that he had come to Copper Ridge 11 years ago with almost nothing enough to buy a stake in a failing saloon and enough stubbornness to refuse to let it fail. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about her father, who had been a school teacher and had insisted that his daughter learn numbers with the same rigor he taught the boys in his class, about the way that had felt like a gift and a burden, both something that made her capable in a world that wasn't always sure it wanted her capable. He said, "He sounds like he understood something most men don't." She said, "He died before I could thank him properly." He said, "In my experience, the people who need thanking know it already." She looked at him. "I'm not sure that's true," she said. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But it's what I've needed to believe about my own mother." The evenings were becoming a thing she noticed herself looking forward to. Not in a way that alarmed her, or at least not in the way she might have expected it to alarm her, given 2 years of learning that closeness was something to be guarded against rather than sought. This was different from the closeness she'd been afraid of. Roy's closeness had been a kind of erasure. He moved toward her, and the room shrank. She became smaller, more careful, more aware of what she said and where she stood. Cole's presence was the opposite of that. She found herself talking more, not less. Thinking out loud about things she had kept to herself for months. Saying things she hadn't realized she believed until she heard herself say them. She was aware of it. She wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but she was aware. The break came on the 12th day, and it didn't come from Roy. It came from Pearl Hensley. Pearl had settled into her role with the cheerful industriousness of someone who had been waiting for a job that suited her natural instinct to be everywhere at once and notice everything. She cleaned rooms, restocked linens, carried messages between floors, and narrated the life of the Silver Crown to anyone who would listen with the enthusiastic thoroughness of a person who considers detailed observation to be a civic virtue. She appeared in the doorway of Nora's office at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, with a look on her face that meant she had information and had been sitting on it long enough that it needed to come out. "Miss Calloway," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know I wasn't eavesdropping. I was replacing the candles in the second-floor hallway, which is my job, and the conversation was happening at a normal volume." Nora put down her pen. "Tell me." There was a man talking to Jimmy Aldridge at the end of the hallway. Jimmy Aldridge was one of the Silver Crown's night porters, friendly, a little careless, 20 years old, and very susceptible to flattery. "I don't know the man's name, but I've seen him before. He drives freight wagons. Sandy hair big through the shoulders, always seems like he's in a good mood, even when he's not." The hair on Nora's arms went flat and cold. What were they talking about? She said carefully. The man was asking Jimmy about the staff. Who lives in the building, who comes in and out at what hours, whether the top floor rooms are occupied. Pearl twisted her hands together. Jimmy was talking. You know how Jimmy is. He wasn't. He didn't know it was wrong. I don't think he just thought it was friendly conversation. What did he say? He said there's a woman staying in the staff rooms on the 4th floor. He said she's the bookkeeper. He didn't say your name, but it doesn't matter, Nora said. He knows I'm here. Miss Calloway, I'm sorry. I came up to tell Mr. Cole right away, but I saw your light on first and… You did exactly right. Nora was already standing. Come with me. They went upstairs together. Cole was in his office with Douglas reviewing something. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway and registered her expression in 1 second flat. Tell me, he said. She told him. Pearl told the rest. Cole looked at Douglas. Something passed between them wordlessly. The particular shorthand of men who have worked together long enough to communicate without sentences. Find Jimmy, Cole said. Douglas left. Cole turned back to Nora. He's inside the building now. Not physically, but he has a source of information inside. Jimmy didn't mean… I know, that doesn't change the fact. He looked at Pearl. From this point, if anyone at all asks you questions about the staff, about who lives here, about Miss Calloway specifically, you tell me immediately, before you tell anyone else, before you respond to them. Pearl nodded wide-eyed. Yes, sir. Good. Go back to work. Keep your eyes open. Pearl left. Nora stood in the middle of the office. He's mapping the building, she said. Yes. He's going to try to come in. He's going to try, Cole said, which is different from succeeding. He moved to the window. But I need to move faster than I have been. What does that mean? He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and looked at her directly. I need to go see Sheriff Granger, he said. She blinked. I already tried. You tried as Nora Calloway bookkeeper. His voice was level. I'm going as Garrett Cole, who employs 43 people in this county and owns a building whose tax contribution to this municipality is not small. A pause. That's a different conversation. She looked at him. She wanted to believe it would work. She had been disappointed by that particular hope before the hope that the right person with the right leverage could make the official machinery care about a woman being followed. She had watched that hope die in 2 sheriff's offices already. But both of those times, she had been the one doing the asking. What will you say? She asked. The truth. That a man who was removed from employment at my establishment for harassment of a staff member has since accessed the building through social manipulation, corresponded with said staff member in threatening terms, and is demonstrably escalating a pattern of behavior that has followed her across 3 towns over 2 years. He paused. And that I expect the sheriff's office to treat this with the seriousness it deserves, or I'll be writing to the territorial governor's office to ask why they're not. She was quiet for a moment. You'd do that, she said, not a question. I've already written the letter, he said. I'm hoping I don't have to send it. Something moved in her chest. Something she didn't try to name because naming it felt premature, and she had learned to be careful about premature things. When? She said. Tomorrow morning. She nodded. He looked at her for a moment. Are you all right? He asked. The question surprised her enough that she actually considered it honestly before answering, which was not something she usually allowed herself. I don't know yet, she said. That's an honest answer. You seem to prefer those. I do. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face, brief and careful, the expression of a man who had learned to ration certain things. Get some sleep, Miss Calloway. Tomorrow is going to require both of us to be sharp. She went downstairs to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time before she lit the lamp. Outside, Copper Ridge hummed with its nighttime self. The distant sound of the saloon below the creak and call of an ordinary Thursday evening in a mining town that mostly didn't know and mostly didn't care about the thing happening in its margins. She thought about Roy mapping the building. She thought about Jimmy Aldridge's friendly, careless conversation in the hallway. She thought about Cole saying, I've already written the letter. And she thought about something that had occurred to her for the first time that evening in Cole's office, watching him tell Pearl to come to him first before anyone else. Roy Briggs had been systematic and patient and resourceful for 2 years. But he had never in 2 years encountered anyone who matched him system for system, patience for patience. He had only ever encountered her one woman alone trying to stay invisible. Now there were 2 of them watching, and one of them was Garrett Cole. For the first time in 2 years, the math looked different to Nora Calloway. She reached for the lamp. She lit it. She opened her ledger and went to work. Sheriff Dan Granger received Cole the next morning with the particular expression of a man who has been interrupted at breakfast by a problem he would have preferred to avoid until lunch. He was a large, slow-moving man in his middle 50s, with the air of someone who had made his peace with the limits of what one lawman could do and had perhaps made that peace a little too comfortably. Cole sat across from him without being invited to and said, "I'm here about Roy Briggs." Granger set down his coffee cup. "The freight man. The man who has been following one of my employees across 3 towns and 2 years, and who 2 nights ago used a member of my staff to gather information about her living arrangements inside my building." Granger's expression shifted toward careful. "Now, Garrett, she came to you 3 weeks ago. She came in to talk, yes. I didn't see evidence of... You told her she might have encouraged him." A pause. Granger had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now," Cole said. "You're going to open a formal file on Roy Briggs. You're going to document the letter he delivered to her boarding house, which I have in my possession, as a written communication of threatening intent. You're going to have a direct conversation with Briggs, informing him that he is under official observation." He paused. "And if he comes within 50 yards of Nora Calloway or the Silver Crown Hotel again, I expect your office to act on it immediately." Granger looked at him for a long moment. "And if I don't?" he said, not belligerent, genuinely asking. Cole reached into his coat and placed a folded letter on the desk. "That's addressed to Territorial Governor Crawford's office," he said. "It details the specific failure of this office to respond to a documented pattern of harassment against a working woman in this county, and it requests an inquiry into the department's handling of similar complaints." He left it on the desk. "I'd rather not send it. I'd rather you and I solve this at the local level the way things work best." Granger looked at the letter, looked at Cole, looked at the letter again. Then he picked up his coffee cup and drank from it slowly, and when he put it down, his expression had changed into something that resembled, however reluctantly, the beginnings of a man deciding to do his job. "I'll open the file," he said. "Today. Today." Granger agreed with the sigh of a man conceding a card game. "And Briggs, I'll have a talk with him." "An official talk," Cole said. "On the record. On the record." Granger picked up a pen with the energy of someone picking up something much heavier. "You want to leave me that letter, the one he sent her?" "I have a copy for you. The original stays with me." Cole stood. Granger looked up. "You're very invested in your bookkeeper, Garrett." Cole looked at him evenly. "I'm invested in the principle," he said, "that a woman who works honestly and keeps to herself ought to be able to do that without someone making it impossible." He picked up his hat. "That's not a complicated position." He walked out. He stood on the step outside the sheriff's office for a moment in the cool morning air and thought about what came next, because Granger opening a file was a step, not a solution. An official conversation with Briggs was a warning, not a wall. Roy Briggs was smart enough to know the difference, which meant the next move, whatever it was, would be designed to stay just inside the line of what law could touch. Cole had dealt with men like that before. Men who were disciplined about the space between legal and wrong, who operated in that margin with precision and patience, who understood that the law was a shape they could bend around. He had also dealt with men who were so certain of their own system that they couldn't see when it was being used against them. He walked back to the Silver Crown with the morning crowd moving around him, and he was already 3 moves ahead, arranging pieces on a board that Roy Briggs didn't yet know he was playing on. That was the thing about systematic men. They were predictable. And Garrett Cole had been waiting for someone predictable for 11 days. He was ready. Roy Briggs had a plan. He didn't know Garrett Cole had already read it. Sheriff Granger's official conversation with Roy Briggs happened on a Friday afternoon. Nora knew because Pearl told her, and Pearl knew because Jimmy Aldridge told her, and Jimmy Aldridge knew because he had been walking past the sheriff's office on his way to the feed store and had seen Roy coming out the front door with the particular expression of a man who has just been told something he considers a minor inconvenience rather than a serious warning. He was smiling, Pearl said. Nora looked up from her ledger. When he came out, not a big smile, a small one, the kind that means he's already decided it doesn't matter. Pearl twisted the hem of her apron. I don't know if that's bad or not. It's information, Nora said. Thank you. She went upstairs. Cole was at his desk. He read her face the way he always did that single fast assessment that she had stopped finding unsettling and started finding against her better judgment, something close to comforting. He smiled when he left Granger's office. She said. Cole nodded slowly. I expected that. Then why? Because the file is open now, he said. Everything Briggs does from this point is documented. Every contact, every sighting, every letter. He looked at her directly. Right now, he thinks the sheriff's visit was a formality. He thinks this is the same situation he's been in before, one powerful man making noise, nothing behind it. A pause. He's wrong, but I want him to believe he's right for a little while longer. She studied him. You're letting him think he has more room than he does. I'm letting him move, Cole said, because a man who's moving makes choices, and choices leave evidence. She was quiet for a moment. You've done this before, she said. Not this exactly, he said, but something like it. He didn't explain further, and she didn't push. She had learned that Cole expanded on things when expansion was useful, and left things compact when they needed to stay that way. It was another thing that was different from what she'd known before. Most men she'd encountered either told you too much to seem important or too little to seem powerful. Cole told you exactly what the situation required. She went back to her ledger. She tried to trust the plan. She almost managed it. Roy's next move came not from Roy directly, but from a woman named Helen Marsh. Helen Marsh was 60 years old, sharp-eyed, and the proprietor of the town's most popular dress shop, which also functioned, this being a small town in 1883, as its primary clearinghouse for social information. She arrived at the Silver Crown on a Tuesday morning asking to speak with Nora, which was unusual enough that Nora agreed to see her in the small front room off the lobby rather than upstairs. Helen sat down with the careful posture of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say. I want you to know, Helen began, that I'm coming to you directly because I don't believe in going around people. I appreciate that, Nora said. A man came into my shop 3 days ago, Roy Briggs. You know him? Nora kept her hands very still in her lap. I do. He told me a story about you. Helen's voice was careful and even. He said you'd had an understanding, an engagement he called it, and that you'd left him without explanation. He said you were troubled, that you'd had difficulties before you came to Copper Ridge, that people who hired you or trusted you often ended up regretting it. She paused. He said he was telling people out of concern, because he didn't want anyone in this town to be hurt the way he'd been hurt. The room was very quiet. Nora heard her own breathing. She had known this was coming, not this specific version, but something like it. She had watched Roy work this particular tool before the sympathetic story, the concerned friend, the gradual erosion of reputation that made people start looking at her sideways before anything else happened. What she had not expected was for someone to come and tell her directly to her face. And you're telling me this because, Nora said. Because I've been in this town for 20 years, Helen said flatly, and I know the difference between a man who's concerned and a man who's campaigning. Roy Briggs was campaigning. She looked at Nora steadily. I've also heard other things that tell a different version of the story. From whom? Various people. A pause. Pearl Hensley's mother is a friend of mine. Pearl talks to her mother. Helen folded her hands. I'm not here to make your business into gossip. I'm here to tell you that there is a conversation happening about you in this town, and I think you deserve to know about it. Nora looked at her for a long moment. She thought about 2 years of silence. 2 years of handling it quietly. 2 years of the private architecture of survival that Roy kept systematically dismantling. How many people has he spoken to? She asked. That I know of 4. Henry Burke at the bank, Margaret Tillis at the post office, Dr. Sawyer's receptionist, and myself. The bank, the post office, the doctor's office. Every place a single woman in a small town needed access to in order to function. She felt something cold move through her. He's building something, she said almost to herself. It looks that way, Helen agreed. Thank you, Nora said. I mean it. Thank you for coming to me. Helen stood. She paused at the door. I told Roy Briggs, she said, that I didn't think his story held together and that he might want to be more careful about what he said in my shop going forward. A beat. He thanked me for my time and smiled the whole way out. She looked back at Nora. Be careful, Miss Calloway. That kind of smile worries me more than anger would. Me too, Nora said quietly. Helen left. Nora sat alone in the front room for 30 seconds. Then she went upstairs at a pace that was not quite running. Cole took the information with the stillness she had come to expect, but something was different this time. She could see it not in his expression, which remained measured, but in the way he pushed back from his desk and stood. Movement that wasn't habitual. He's working the social layer, Cole said. The bank, the post office, the doctor. She pressed her hands flat against the desk between them. He's making sure that if I try to function independently in this town, there are people who will already have doubts about me. He's isolating you without walls. Cole was pacing now, short, controlled movements. He doesn't need to physically corner you if everyone around you has already been told you're unreliable. This is what he did in Pueblo, she said. It's why I left. By the end, my landlady was looking at me differently. My employer started asking questions. She stopped. I couldn't tell who he'd talked to and who he hadn't. The whole town felt like it had been turned against me, and I didn't know the shape of it. This time, you know the shape, Cole said. 4 people. That you know of? Their eyes met. More, she said. Probably. He stopped pacing. But we know where he started. The bank, the post office, the doctor, those aren't random. He chose institutions. Places with authority. Because if the bank has doubts about you, that spreads differently than if a neighbor has doubts about you. He wants people in authority to doubt me, she said. So that if I go to them for help, they're already half against me before I open my mouth. Yes. She felt the particular nausea of understanding something she had been living inside without fully seeing. He's been planning this since you pulled the freight contract, she said. The letter under your door was the first move, Cole said. This is the second, which means there's a third, she said. There's always a third. He looked at her directly. We need to move before he gets there. How? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I need to call in some obligations. She looked at him. Henry Burke at the bank has owed me a professional courtesy for 2 years, Cole said. Margaret Tillis at the post office, her brother works in my stable, and I've given him more grace than most employers would on 3 separate occasions. He paused. Dr. Sawyer delivered my foreman's youngest child in a storm last January, and I paid the bill without being asked. Nora stared at him. You're going to use your relationships to counterbrief them, she said. I'm going to make sure they have accurate information, he said, before Roy Briggs' version becomes the only one they know. She understood, then really understood, what it meant to have someone in your corner who had been building the kind of presence in a community that took years to construct. Roy had charm and patience. Cole had something different, A decade of being a person whose word meant something in every room in Copper Ridge. It wasn't leverage in the way that word usually meant. It was reputation being used exactly the way reputation was supposed to be used. When? She asked. Today. He reached for his hat. I want to be ahead of whatever his third move is. Cole. The name came out before she'd decided to use it, his last name, which she hadn't used to his face before, always Mr. Cole, or a careful avoidance of address. He paused. This is what you're doing. It matters. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said simply. And then he left. She stood in his empty office for a moment. Then she went back downstairs and did the thing she always did when she didn't know what else to do. She opened her ledger. She found her numbers. She counted and counted until her hands stopped shaking. Summed. Cole was gone for 3 hours. When he came back differently than he had left. Something settled in the line of his shoulders that hadn't been there before, the quality of a man who has done the thing he set out to do and has adjusted to the result. He stopped in the doorway of her office. Burke at the bank is aware of the full situation, he said. Margaret Tillis is aware. Dr. Sawyer's receptionist is the daughter of a woman who went through something similar in '78, and she's more than aware she was ready to be angry the moment I finished explaining. A pause. None of them will repeat Roy Briggs's version as fact. All of them will come to us if he approaches them again. Nora put down her pen. Did they ask how you knew? Yes. What did you tell them? The truth, he said. That you've been dealing with this for 2 years. That it followed you here. That it should stop here. She was quiet. What did they say? He came fully into the room and sat across from her, not at the edge of the desk the way he sometimes did, but in the chair at eye level, which was itself a kind of information. Burke said he wished you'd come to him directly, Cole said. Tillis said she'd noticed Roy asking questions at the post office counter and had thought it was strange. The receptionist. A slight pause. She said she hoped you knew you weren't the first woman in this situation and that it wasn't your fault. Nora looked at the wall behind his head for a moment. She wasn't going to cry. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in 2 years, and she wasn't going to start. But something was happening in her chest, a loosening of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, and she needed a moment to manage it. All right, she said when she trusted her voice. All right, he agreed. He stayed. She didn't tell him to leave. They sat in the quiet of the office with the afternoon light shifting through the window, and after a moment she picked up her pen, and he reached across for the correspondence on the corner of her desk that she'd been meaning to give him, and they both went back to work. It was the most ordinary thing. It felt to Nora Calloway like something extraordinary. Roy Briggs made his third move on a Thursday night. The third move was not subtle. Douglas came to her door at 9:30 in the evening and knocked twice, the specific knock they had agreed on, 2 short and 1 long. And when she opened it, his face had the expression of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. There's a fire, he said. She was dressed and in the hallway before he finished the sentence. It wasn't the building. She established that first, not the Silver Crown, not the roof, not the back rooms. The fire was across the alley in the small storage shed attached to the building next door, which happened to contain, as she knew from her ledgers, 6 months of supply inventory belonging to the Silver Crown. The fire had started, Douglas told her as they went downstairs from what looked like a tipped lantern near the back wall. Cole was already outside. He was standing in the alley with Pierce and 2 other men she recognized as the overnight staff watching the bucket brigade that had formed with the disciplined attention of someone cataloging an event he had been halfway expecting. She stood next to him. The inventory, she said. Replaceable, he said. Roy, she said. He didn't answer immediately. Then possibly, not provably. She looked at him. This feels different. It is different. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it now, something harder, the quality of a man reaching the end of patience he has been husbanding very carefully. This is property. The letter was threat. The social campaign was strategy. This is escalation, she said. Escalation, he confirmed. The fire was contained within 20 minutes, small enough the men agreed that it had probably been set with that in mind. Enough to send a message. Not enough to bring the law down in a way that couldn't be argued with. Just inside the line. The same margin Roy always worked in. She watched the last of the smoke clear and felt something crystallize in her that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but something in between, something harder and cleaner than either. He'll never be provably guilty, she said. Not of any single thing. The letter could be explained. The social visits could be explained. This, she gestured at the shed, could be explained. Yes, Cole said. Which means waiting for him to do something the sheriff can definitively act on is not a complete strategy on its own. He turned to look at her directly. Which is something I've been thinking about. And there's a federal land office representative coming to Copper Ridge in 2 weeks, Cole said, for routine territorial business. His name is Agent Calhoun, and he's based out of Denver, and he has considerably broader jurisdiction than Sheriff Granger. She looked at him carefully. Roy hasn't done anything federal. Not yet. A pause. But I've been doing some background research on Roy Briggs, and Briggs has done things in other towns that are worth a federal agent knowing about. The air changed between them. What kind of things? She said slowly. Cole looked at her steadily. The kind of things, he said, that a man who's good at seeming normal does in every town before he moves to the next one. And the kind of things that when you line them all up across multiple jurisdictions start to look like a pattern that a territorial law enforcement officer would be very interested in. She stared at him. You've been investigating him, she said. This whole time, not just protecting me. You've been building a file on him. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't have enough yet. And because I didn't want to give you hope I couldn't guarantee. He held her gaze. I'm telling you now because the fire means we're past the stage where I can wait until the file is complete. We have enough. The night was cooling around them, the alley emptying as the bucket brigade dispersed the smell of smoke settling into the air. She thought about 2 years. She thought about all the things Roy Briggs had done that were just inside the line. What's in the file? She said. In Salida 3 years ago, a woman named Frances Alderton filed a complaint against Roy Briggs for trespass and property damage. The case was dropped when Frances left town unexpectedly. He paused. In a town called Cedar Fork, 2 years before that, a woman named Jane Whitmore broke an engagement with Roy Briggs and subsequently had her employer receive 3 anonymous letters accusing her of theft. She lost her position. Nora's hands went cold. He's done this before, she said. He's been doing this for at least 7 years that I can document. Cole's voice was even, but just barely. You're not the first, Nora. She heard her name, her first name the first time he had used it without the miss, and it landed somewhere specific. Frances Alderton, she said. Jane Whitmore. There may be others I haven't found yet. She was quiet for a long time. The thing about hearing that was complicated. There was something awful about it. The confirmation that Roy had done this before, would have done it again, would have moved on from her eventually to someone else and started the whole machinery running again. And there was something else. Something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not relief that other women had suffered. Relief that the shape of what had happened to her was real and documented, and not the thing she had sometimes been afraid. It was in the long middle-of-the-night hours when doubt crept in. Not something she had misread. Not something she had caused. Not something that a more careful or more reasonable woman could have simply avoided. It was real. It had a pattern. It had other names attached to it. Calhoun, she said when she could speak again. The federal agent. I'll have a meeting with him his first day in town. I want to be there, she said. Cole looked at her. Nora. I want to be there, she said again. Steady. It's my testimony that matters most. The other women aren't here. I am. She met his gaze directly. You can build the file, But I have to be the one who stands in the room and says what happened. That's the only way this works." He studied her face for a moment. She held his gaze and did not waver. "All right," he said. "All right." They stood in the alley in the cooling night with the smell of smoke between them, and something had shifted, not just in the situation, but in something between them, something she couldn't quite name, but could feel as clearly as the cold air on her face. She was not the person she had been in that hallway 3 weeks ago. She wasn't sure exactly when the change had happened. Not in one moment. In the accumulation of many the evenings in his office. The conversations that started with ledgers and ended with truth. The slow recognition that someone else was carrying part of the weight she had been carrying alone. She was different. And she thought carefully provisionally, the way she approached all things, she wasn't yet certain of that he might be different too. Roy Briggs showed up at the Silver Crown the following morning. Not in secret. Not through a side door or via a social conversation in a back hallway. He walked in the front entrance at 10 o'clock in the morning, while the lobby was occupied by 4 staff members and 2 hotel guests, and Douglas on the landing, and he asked the front desk clerk if he could speak with Miss Calloway. The clerk looked at him, looked at Douglas. Douglas was already moving. "Mr. Briggs." Douglas's voice was pleasant and entirely without warmth. "Mr. Cole asked that I let you know if you came by that Miss Calloway isn't available. I just have a quick word to say to her." Roy's smile was wide and easy, the full version, the one he used on people who didn't know him yet. "It'll only take a moment." "She's not available," Douglas said. "Maybe she'd like to decide that for herself." "She already has." Roy looked past Douglas toward the stairs. "I don't see her anywhere saying that." "You don't need to see her saying it." Douglas took one step forward, not aggressive, closing distance with the calm of someone who has had this kind of conversation before. "She's told Mr. Cole her position and I'm passing it along. The answer is no." Roy's smile didn't disappear, but it thinned. "Must be nice," he said conversationally. "Having a man do your talking for you. Must be frustrating," Douglas said, "not being able to get 5 seconds of a woman's time despite everything you've tried." The lobby went very quiet. Roy looked at Douglas for a long moment. Then he looked at the other people in the lobby, the clerk, the 2 guests, the girl polishing the banister at the far end. All of them were watching him. Not one of them looked uncertain about whose side of the room they were standing on. Roy looked back at Douglas. "Tell Miss Calloway," he said very pleasantly, "that I look forward to seeing her soon." "I won't be delivering that message," Douglas said, "but I will be reporting this visit to Sheriff Granger's office in accordance with the documentation requirements of the open file on your conduct. Good morning, Mr. Briggs." Something happened in Roy's face, very fast. Very small, something that was not the easy smile and not the amusement and not the certainty. Something that looked just for 1 second, before he controlled it like the beginning of the recognition that the situation he was in was different from every situation he had been in before. He left. Douglas watched him go. Then he looked up at the landing where Cole was standing with his arms crossed, having watched the whole exchange from above without intervening. "Good," Douglas said. "That's on the record," Cole said. "Witnesses, in a public space. Exactly what we needed." Douglas nodded. Cole's gaze shifted to Nora, who had been standing at the edge of the lobby doorway, visible to no one from the front entrance, but with a clear line of sight to everything that had just happened. She had watched Roy's face. She had watched Douglas hold the line. She had watched the lobby full of people stand quietly on the correct side of the room without needing to be told to. And she had watched Roy Briggs's certainty crack just slightly, just for a second, under the weight of something he hadn't encountered in 7 years of doing this to women who had no one standing behind them. She had watched him meet a wall and not know what to do with it. Cole crossed the landing and came down the stairs. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "He said he'd see me soon," she said. "I know." "That's the thing he says before he moves from planning into—" She stopped. "I know? Cole said again. He was standing close enough that she could have touched his arm without fully extending her reach. She didn't, but she was aware of it. Calhoun gets here in 11 days, he said. I know. We need to get through 11 days. I know that too. She looked at him directly. Tell me what you need me to do. He looked at her for a moment. What you've been doing, he said. Stay close. Tell me everything. Trust the plan. I do, she said. Trust the plan. A slight pause. And trust you, she added. Something moved in his face, that brief, careful shift she had learned to watch for. That means something, he said quietly. Given everything. I know it does, she said. That's why I said it. They stood in the lobby of the Silver Crown, with the ordinary morning noise of Copper Ridge carrying on around them, and Nora Calloway understood with the same clarity she brought to numbers, the same precision she brought to columns of figures that had to balance that something in the equation of her life had changed fundamentally. She had come to Copper Ridge invisible and careful and alone. She was none of those things anymore. And Roy Briggs, systematic patient, 7 years experienced at doing this to women who had no one, was about to discover what happened when the woman he was hunting had learned to stop going quiet. 11 days. She could do 11 days. She had already survived 2 years. Nye. On the 9th day, Roy Briggs disappeared. Not fled, not completely. He was still in Copper Ridge. His things were still at his rented room on the west side of town. He hadn't bought a stage ticket or made arrangements to leave. He had simply stopped being visible. No sightings on the main street. No social visits to the bank or the post office. No appearance at the Silver Crown. No letters. Nothing. Pierce reported it to Cole on a Wednesday afternoon. He's gone quiet. Cole absorbed this without visible reaction. But that evening when Nora went upstairs and found him standing at the window, she recognized the quality of his stillness. He knows Calhoun is coming, she said. Yes. How? Calhoun's visit was announced in the territorial newsletter 2 weeks ago, Cole said. It wasn't a secret. Anyone paying attention would know. He's been paying attention. Always? Cole turned from the window. He's going quiet because he's calculating, trying to determine whether Calhoun's visit is routine or whether it's connected to him. Is he going to run? Not yet. If he runs before Calhoun arrives, it looks like guilt. If he stays... Cole paused. He thinks he's been careful enough. He thinks there's nothing provable. Is there enough to matter? Cole looked at her steadily. There's enough, he said. Frances Alderton wrote me back from Salida. She's willing to provide a written statement. The air in the room changed. She wrote back, Nora said. 2 days ago. I didn't want to tell you until I was sure of the content. He crossed to his desk and picked up a folded letter. She described a situation almost identical to yours. The cornering. The letters. The social campaign against her reputation. The property incident that was never provably him. He set the letter down. She said, and I'm reading this directly, I left because I was alone and frightened, and I did not believe anyone would help me. I am writing this now because if he is doing it again to another woman, I want her to know she is not imagining it. Nora pressed her hand flat against her collarbone. She didn't speak for a moment. Frances Alderton, she finally said. She asked if you were all right. Something broke open very quietly inside Nora Calloway. Something that had been sealed for 2 years. The particular sealed chamber where she kept the version of herself that had not been believed, that had been told to be more careful, that had handled it quietly, because loudness had consequences. She was not going to cry. She had promised herself. She pressed her hand harder against her collarbone. Tell her, she said, and her voice was entirely steady, even though her eyes were bright, that I am going to be all right. Tell her that this time there are people in the room. Cole watched her face for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. I'll tell her exactly that, he said. Outside Copper Ridge moved through its 9th evening since Roy Briggs had gone quiet. The Silver Crown settled into its nighttime sounds. 2 days until Calhoun arrived. Nora went to her room. She sat at her small table. She didn't open her ledger. She just sat with Francis Alderton's words moving through her. I want her to know she is not imagining it, and let herself feel for the first time in 2 years the exact weight of what she had been carrying. Then she set it down. Not all of it. Not yet. But some of it. Some of it she set down. And in the morning, she got up. Because in 2 days, Agent Calhoun was coming, and Nora Calloway had things to say. Roy Briggs thought he had one more move. He was wrong. Agent Calhoun arrived on a Thursday morning on the 11 o'clock stage. Nora knew the moment he walked through the Silver Crown's front entrance that he was not what she had been bracing herself for. She had spent 2 days constructing a careful internal portrait of a federal agent, distant procedural, the kind of man who listened to testimony with the expression of someone filing papers rather than hearing people. She had prepared herself for that. She had rehearsed her account in the precise, unemotional language she used for ledger entries, because she had learned that emotional women were discounted, and that the cost of being believed was often the cost of appearing not to feel. Calhoun was perhaps 50 lean, with the particular kind of tired that came not from laziness, but from years of seeing things that were hard to unsee. He shook Cole's hand and then looked directly at Nora and said, "You must be Miss Calloway. I've read Mr. Cole's correspondence. I want you to know that I take this seriously." He said it the way Cole said things, like a fact. She recalibrated. "Thank you," she said. "I want you to know that I intend to be thorough." Something in his expression shifted a small acknowledgement. "Good," he said. "Thorough is what we need." They went upstairs. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours. Cole presented the file first. The documentation, the letter from Francis Alderton, the incident reports from Salida, the records from Cedar Fork, the timeline he had assembled across 3 towns and 7 years. He laid it out the way she imagined a case should be laid out factually in sequence, without embellishment, letting the pattern speak for itself. Calhoun took notes, asked precise questions, went back twice to clarify dates. Then he looked at Nora. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I'd like to hear your account directly, from the beginning." She had rehearsed it. She had the unemotional version ready, the ledger version stripped of everything that felt like weakness. She opened her mouth, and then she put the rehearsed version down. She told him the truth instead. Not the loud truth, not tears, not drama, but the complete truth, with all the pieces she had learned to leave out when she talked to people who might not believe her. The fear that had become so constant, she'd stopped recognizing it as fear and started thinking of it as weather. The careful architecture of her invisible life and how many times he had dismantled it. The sheriff in Salida and what he had said. The sheriff in Copper Ridge and what he had said. The letter under the door and the words, "You made a mistake, Nora." The fire. Helen Marsh coming to tell her about the campaign against her reputation. She told him about Francis Alderton and what Francis had written. I want her to know she is not imagining it. She told him about going quiet instead of screaming and what Roy had said about it in the hallway. You never scream. I've noticed that about you, and the particular horror of that sentence, which was not the threat in it, but the intimacy. The proof that he had been studying her the way she had been trying to study him. When she finished, the room was quiet. Calhoun looked at his notes. 7 years, he said. That I know of, Cole said. 3 documented women, possibly more. Possibly more, Cole confirmed. Calhoun looked at Nora. You understand that what I can act on federally is limited to matters that cross territorial jurisdiction. The pattern across multiple territories is what gives my office standing here. I understand, she said. What I can do, Calhoun said carefully, is open a formal federal inquiry into Roy Briggs's conduct across jurisdictions. That puts him under a different kind of scrutiny than a local sheriff's file. It also means that anything he does from this point is happening under federal documentation. He paused. It won't arrest him today. I know that, she said. It will, however, make it significantly more difficult for him to do what he's done in the past. move to a new town, and start over with a clean slate. She thought about Frances Alderton leaving Salida, Jane Whitmore losing her position in Cedar Fork. Every woman who had picked up and moved and tried to rebuild and watched the same thing begin again somewhere else. That matters, she said. Making it harder to start over somewhere else matters as much as stopping him here. Calhoun looked at her with the expression of someone who has dealt with this situation enough times to recognize something specific when he hears it. Yes, he said. It does. He gathered his papers. I'll want to speak with Sheriff Granger this afternoon, and I'll need a formal written statement from you, Miss Calloway, before I leave Copper Ridge. I'll have it ready by this evening, she said. He looked at her for a moment. You've handled this with considerable steadiness, he said. Considering. I've had practice, she said. It wasn't bitter, just true. Calhoun nodded. Then he looked at Cole. You built this file in 3 weeks. I had good information, Cole said. You had motivation, Calhoun said. Something in his tone was neither approving nor disapproving, simply observant. I'll note that in the record. He picked up his hat. Good afternoon, Mr. Cole. Miss Calloway. He left. The office settled into the silence that followed a thing that had been building for a long time and had finally at least partly landed. Nora sat with her hands in her lap. Cole didn't say anything immediately, which she appreciated. He let the moment be what it was. Then she said, It's not over. No, he agreed. He's still in town. He's still quiet, which means he's still planning. Yes? And a federal inquiry takes time. It does. He paused. But it changes what he can safely do. Every move he makes now is being watched by someone with authority he can't charm or route around. Cole looked at her steadily. He's used to operating in the margins. The margins just got considerably narrower. She absorbed that. He's going to know Calhoun was here, she said. He probably already knows. The stage arrival isn't a secret. Cole leaned back. Which means he's calculating right now, trying to determine whether this changes his position enough to require changing his plan. Does it? It should, Cole said. Whether it does depends on how rational he is when cornered. The word cornered sat between them with its specific weight. She was the one who had been cornered for 2 years. Now the word was being applied to Roy. She wasn't sure yet what to do with that. She wrote the statement at her desk that afternoon, 4 pages close written, every detail she could document, dates and places and specific language where she could remember it. She was good at detail. Numbers were detail. Dates were numbers. She wrote it the way she kept her ledgers, precisely without gaps, with everything in its correct order. She was on the 3rd page when Pearl knocked. Miss Calloway! Pearl's face had the look that meant information she'd been sitting on. Jimmy Aldridge told me something this morning, and I wasn't sure if it mattered, but I think it matters. Nora put down her pen. Tell me. Roy Briggs came to talk to Jimmy last night. Not at the Silver Crown, at the rooming house where Jimmy boards. He knocked on Jimmy's door at 9 o'clock at night. Pearl twisted her hands. He said he wasn't angry at Jimmy for what happened, the information thing. He said he understood Jimmy hadn't meant any harm. He said he just wanted to know one thing. The cold moved through Nora's chest again. What thing? She said carefully. Whether you were happy here. Pearl's voice was small. He told Jimmy he just wanted to make sure you were happy and being treated well, and that he worried about you. Nora set her pen down completely. She recognized this. She had seen it in Salida, though she hadn't known what to call it at the time. The pivot from pressure to concern. The reframe of his own behavior as care. The suggestion planted gently in the mind of someone peripheral that his interest in her was not predatory, but protective. He was rebuilding his public image, one conversation at a time. What did Jimmy say? She asked. He said he thought you seemed fine. He said Mr. Cole takes good care of his employees. Pearl paused. Roy said Jimmy told me. This exactly. Roy said, I just hope she knows that some men's protection comes with a price. A woman should be careful about whose help she accepts. Silence. Nora stood up. "Where's Mr. Cole?" she said. She found him at the top of the stairs, talking to Douglas. She waited the 12 seconds it took for Douglas to finish his report and move away, and then she told Cole what Pearl had said. He went very still. Not the calm stillness of a man in control. The other kind. The kind that was one layer above anger. "He's turned it around," Cole said. "He's telling people I'm the threat. He's planting it," she said. "Not announcing it, planting it. In the right people. Jimmy talks. People listen to Jimmy because he's friendly and harmless." She felt her voice sharpen. "He's going to suggest to everyone who'll listen that you're keeping me here against my will, that your protection isn't protection at all." Cole's jaw tightened. "He's trying to isolate you from me the way he isolated you from everyone else." "Yes." She met his eyes. "He saw that you were the thing that was different this time. Everything he's tried hasn't worked because you were there. So now he's going after you." The logic of it was so clean, it was almost mechanical. She could see the whole shape of it the way Roy had identified the single structural element that had changed her situation and was now applying pressure to it directly. He had always been systematic. "What do we do?" she said. Cole thought for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had returned to its level register. "Nothing," he said. She stared at him. "Nothing. We don't respond to it. We don't chase it down. We don't try to counter-brief Jimmy or anyone else Roy talks to." He looked at her directly. "Because if we respond, we validate it. We make it look like there's something to respond to. But people will hear it, and some people will hear it and wonder," he said. "Yes, and that's uncomfortable. But Roy is counting on us reacting. He's counting on me coming out to defend myself, which looks exactly like what a man with something to hide would do." A pause. The best response to a false story is to make the true one impossible to ignore. She looked at him. "How?" "Calhoun is meeting with Granger this afternoon," Cole said. "By this evening, there will be a federal inquiry opened in this town on the record with Roy Briggs's name on it. That story is going to move faster than anything Roy says to Jimmy Aldridge." He held her gaze. "People in this town know me. They've known me for 11 years. Roy Briggs has been here for 6 weeks. When the federal file becomes public knowledge, and it will, I want you to think about which story people are going to believe." She thought about it. She thought about Helen Marsh coming to tell her directly, about Margaret Tillis at the post office, who had noticed Roy's questions and thought they were strange, about Dr. Sawyer's receptionist, whose mother had been through something similar in '78. She thought about a lobby full of people who had stood quietly on the correct side of the room without being asked. "All right," she said. "We don't respond." "We hold," he said. She nodded. She went back to her statement and she finished it. The federal inquiry was filed on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, it was the primary topic of conversation at the feed store, the post office, the Silver Crown Bar, and according to Pearl, who had established herself as the most reliable intelligence source, Nora had ever had access to 3 separate households on the west side of town. Roy Briggs's name was attached to it. The nature of the inquiry harassment across territorial jurisdictions, documented pattern of conduct targeting women, was not kept from public knowledge, because Calhoun saw no reason to keep it from public knowledge, and Cole had made no request that he do so. Nora heard the shift in the building before she saw it. It was in the quality of the looks she received from staff members, not pitying, which she would have hated, but something more like respect for having gone through something they now understood was real and documented, and not the kind of thing a reasonable person would invent. Mrs. Hale, the head housekeeper, who had never been anything but professionally cordial, stopped by her office on Friday afternoon and put a plate of ginger cookies on her desk without explanation and left. Nora looked at the cookies for a long moment. Then she ate one and kept working. The shift in Roy's behavior was more dramatic and came faster than she had anticipated. He came to the Silver Crown on Saturday morning. Not in secret. Not through a social channel. He walked in the front entrance again, but this time without the easy smile, without the wide friendliness, without any of the performance that had been his standard equipment. He asked the front desk clerk to see Mr. Cole, not Nora. Cole. Douglas brought the message upstairs. Cole looked at Nora. "You don't have to be in the room," he said. "I want to be in the room," she said. He considered her for a moment. "Behind the connecting door," he said. "Where you can hear everything." It wasn't what she wanted, but she recognized the logic Roy in the room with Cole, and also Nora, was a different dynamic than Roy in the room with Cole alone. She would hear everything, Cole would tell her everything, and she would be close. "All right," she said. She went into the adjoining room and stood with the connecting door open 6 inches. She heard Roy's boots on the stairs. She heard him come in. She heard Cole say, "Mr. Briggs, sit down." A pause. Roy sat. "You know why I'm here," Roy said. His voice was different. The conversational ease was gone. He sounded not small, not yet, but careful in a way he hadn't been before. "I have a general idea," Cole said. "The federal inquiry." "Yes. I want to know what you told him." "I told him the truth," Cole said, "which is also what Miss Calloway told him, which is also what Francis Alderton told him in writing from Salida." A silence. "Francis," Roy started. "Alderton." "Yes." Cole's voice was entirely level. She was happy to provide a statement. Apparently she's been waiting for an opportunity for about 3 years. The silence this time was longer. Behind the connecting door, Nora pressed her back against the wall and held completely still. "This is a misunderstanding," Roy said finally. "I have never harmed anyone. I have never broken any law. The inquiry will determine that. I want to talk to Nora. That's not going to happen. She has the right to decide." "She's decided," Cole said. "She decided on the day she submitted her statement to Agent Calhoun. You don't get another conversation with her, Briggs. Not today, not next week, not ever." Roy was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed register entirely lower, and with something in it that was not anger but was in the same family. "You think you've handled this," he said. "You think you put a wall between me and her, and that's the end of it. You don't understand, this isn't about laws. This isn't about federal agents. This is between me and Nora." "No," Cole said. "It stopped being between you and Nora the moment you cornered her in my hallway. You made it broader than that. And you continued making it broader with every move you made after that. She needs to hear from me directly. She doesn't need anything from you," Cole said. "That's the thing you've never understood. She doesn't owe you a conversation or an explanation or 5 minutes of her time. You invented an obligation and then pursued her across 3 towns because she wouldn't honor an obligation that was never real." The silence that followed was the longest yet. Nora realized she was holding her breath. She let it out slowly. "I love her," Roy said. 3 words. Quiet. Almost convincing. She had heard them before. She had heard them in Salida in Pueblo, in the particular register of a man who had confused obsession with devotion so completely that he believed his own story. "No," Cole said. "You don't. You don't know how to love someone without owning them. That's not love, that's a different thing entirely, and I think somewhere underneath everything you know that." Roy didn't respond. "You're going to leave Copper Ridge," Cole said. "Today would be better than tomorrow, and tomorrow would be better than the day after that. The inquiry will follow you wherever you go. That's the point of it. But what happens from this point in this town is directly tied to whether you make things worse before you leave." "You're telling me to run." "I'm telling you to be smart," Cole said. For possibly the first time. Another long silence. Then Roy stood. She heard the chair. "Tell her," he started. "I won't be delivering messages," Cole said. "Good morning, Mr. Briggs." She heard Roy's footsteps, heard the door, heard him on the stairs. She waited 30 seconds. Then she opened the connecting door fully and walked into the office. Cole was standing at the window watching the street below. She came to stand beside him. They watched Roy Briggs emerge from the Silver Crown entrance stand on the front step for a moment and then walk not in any particular direction, just away the walk of a man with a lot of recalculating to do. "He said he loves me," she said. "I know." "He believes it," she said. "That's the most frightening part. He genuinely believes it." "Yes." Cole's voice was quiet. "Men like that always do. It's what makes them convinced that persistence is proof of feeling rather than proof of a problem." She watched Roy get smaller down the street. "Do you think he'll leave?" she said. "I think," Cole said carefully, "that he'll calculate the costs. And I think he'll eventually determine that the costs of staying have become higher than the costs of going." A pause. "It might take a few more days. And if it doesn't, then the inquiry progresses and the consequences for him become more formal." He turned slightly to look at her. "But I don't think it comes to that. He's smart enough to read a situation that's closed." She was quiet for a moment. "You told him he doesn't know how to love someone without owning them." "Yes." "That was exact," she said. "I've never heard it described that way before, but that's what it is. That's exactly what it is." Cole looked at her directly. "I know," he said, "because I spent a long time watching what it did to my mother. And I spent a long time after that making sure I understood the difference between those two things." A pause. "Because I didn't want to ever be confused about it." She held his gaze. There was something happening between them that had been building for weeks. Something she had been aware of and careful about the way she was careful about most things, turning it over and examining it for the way it might hurt her. She had found repeatedly that examining it from every angle had not produced the evidence of danger she had been looking for. What she had found instead was the evidence of the opposite. "Cole," she said. "Nora, when this is over, when he's gone and the inquiry is moving and I can walk down the main street again without tracking shadows." She stopped, started again. "I want to know if what's been happening in this office in the evenings with the ledgers that aren't really about ledgers, I want to know if that's something you—" "Yes," he said. Just that. Before she finished. Immediate and without equivocation. She looked at him. "Yes," he said again. "Whatever you were going to ask, yes." She felt something in her chest that she had been sealing very carefully for weeks unlock. Not all at once. Not in a rush. Slowly, the way a door opens when it hasn't been opened in a long time, carefully checking the hinges, making sure the frame is still sound. "I need time," she said. I'm not all the way through this yet. I can't be in the middle of it and also be—" "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be anything right now except what you already are. Which is, someone who survived 2 years of something very hard and is still standing in this room," he said, talking to me. She held his gaze for a long time. "I'm still standing," she said. "You are," he said. "You have been the whole time." Young. Roy Briggs bought a stage ticket on Sunday morning. Pearl found out from the stage office clerk who mentioned it to Jimmy Aldridge, who told Pearl with the slightly bewildered air of someone who had only just understood the full shape of the situation he had been peripheral to. Pearl came to Nora's office at 11 o'clock, with the light of someone delivering the best news they had ever been asked to carry. "He bought a ticket to Pueblo," she said. "Leaves Tuesday morning." Nora put her pen down. She sat with that for a moment. "Pueblo," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She thought about Pueblo. She thought about leaving Pueblo 2 years ago with one trunk, and the knowledge that the town had already been half turned against her. She thought about the woman she had been on that stage counting the miles between herself and Roy, and knowing they would never be enough. "We need to notify Calhoun," she said. "Mr. Cole is already writing to him," Pearl said. "And Sheriff Granger needs to know. Mr. Cole is handling that too." She looked at Pearl. "He got up early. Pearl said, with the particular fondness of someone who has decided to approve of a person and is no longer being subtle about it. Nora stood. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her pen. "Tell Mr. Cole I need to see him when he has a moment," she said. Pearl nodded and left. Nora sat back down. She opened her ledger. She looked at the numbers. The clean, honest, unchanging numbers that had been her steadiest companions through 2 years of everything else being uncertain. For the first time looking at them, she felt something other than relief at their steadiness. She felt something that was close to tenderness, because the numbers had kept her anchored when nothing else could. They had been her rope back to the ground when the fear tried to lift her off it. They had been the thing she could control when everything else was being controlled by someone else. She was grateful for them. But she was aware for the first time that she had been hiding in them too, staying late in the office, not because the accounts needed it, but because the accounts didn't require anything from her that she was afraid to give. Numbers didn't need trust. Numbers couldn't leave. She looked at the ledger for a long time. Then she closed it, and she went upstairs. Cole was at his desk finishing a letter. He looked up when she appeared. "Calhoun is notified," he said. "Granger has been informed. Briggs's departure will be documented." "I know," she said. "Pearl told me." She came fully into the room. She sat across from him in the chair she had sat in on the first morning the day after the hallway, the day everything changed. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right. When this is over," she said, "and I'm not a person who needs protecting anymore, when I'm just a bookkeeper again, and you're just the man who owns the building, what does this look like then?" He put down his pen. He looked at her with the directness she had come to expect and had come to need. "I think," he said, "that you'll always be more than a bookkeeper, and I hope I'll be more than the man who owns the building." He paused. "But I'm not going to put a shape on it before you're ready. I've waited 11 years to feel something like this again. I can wait a little longer until the ground is solid under you." She looked at him. "What did you feel?" she asked quietly. 11 years ago. He was quiet for a moment. "Like the world was worth more than I'd been treating it," he said. "Like I'd been spending my time accumulating things instead of understanding them." He met her eyes. "I lost that feeling when I lost her. I didn't expect to find it again." "But you did," she said. "In a hallway," he said. "At 6:30 in the morning, when a woman told a man to let go of her arm." She held his gaze. "I didn't scream," she said. "No," he said. "You didn't need to." She let out a breath that she felt had been held for 2 years. "2 more days," she said. "2 more days," he agreed. She stood. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at him one more time. "Cole," she said. "Yes. Thank you. For all of it. For building the file and talking to Granger and writing to Francis Alderton and telling Roy Briggs that what he feels isn't love." She paused. "For saying yes before I finished asking." He looked at her steadily. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me enough to stop going quiet." She walked out. She went back to her desk. She opened the ledger again. But this time, she wasn't hiding in it. She was just doing her work, the honest, precise, important work of keeping things in their correct order. And she was aware of the whole building around her, and the people in it. And the man, 2 floors up, who had read a situation in a hallway and made a choice. And the federal agent who was moving paperwork that would follow Roy Briggs wherever he went. And Francis Alderton in Salida, who had waited 3 years to say, "I want her to know she is not imagining it." She was aware of all of it, and underneath all of it, steady and sure, was the knowledge that had been trying to reach her for 2 years, and had finally, in a Silver Crown office on a Saturday morning, broken through. She was not a woman who needed to be invisible in order to be safe. She had simply never, until now, had the right people in the room. Tuesday morning was coming. Roy Briggs' stage was coming. And Nora Calloway, for the first time in 2 years, was not counting down to escape. She was counting toward something else entirely. She survived 2 years alone. She didn't have to anymore. Roy Briggs did not get on the Tuesday stage. Nora found out at 10:30 in the morning when Pearl appeared in her office doorway with an expression that was not the light of good news, but something considerably darker, the face of someone who has been asked to carry information they wish they didn't have. "He didn't board," Pearl said. Nora set her pen down. "The stage left without him." "Yes, ma'am." Tom at the stage office watched him standing on the platform, said he had his bag, said he looked like he was going to get on. Pearl twisted her apron hem. And then the driver called final boarding, and Roy picked up his bag and walked away. The cold moved through Nora's chest the way it always did, that specific cold, the one she associated with Roy, recalculating Roy, finding a new angle. Roy deciding that the shape of the situation still had room for him to move. She was upstairs before Pearl finished the sentence. Cole already knew. Douglas had brought it to him 4 minutes earlier, and he was standing at his window with the expression she had learned to read as controlled anger, the stillness that was not peace. "He changed his mind," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know yet." He turned from the window. "But I intend to find out." "You think something changed?" "Something changed this morning between when he went to the stage office yesterday and when he stood on that platform," Cole said. "Something that made him decide the cost of leaving was higher than the cost of staying." She thought about that. "He found something," she said slowly. "Something he thinks gives him back an advantage." Cole looked at her. "That's what I think," he said. "What could he have found?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "And that worries me more than knowing would." She sat down in the chair across from his desk. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "All right," she said. "We think." "What changed between yesterday and this morning that Roy would know about?" "Calhoun left Copper Ridge on Monday," Cole said. "Roy knew that stage departures aren't private. He knew Calhoun was gone." "He knew the federal presence was physically removed." "Yes, but the inquiry is still open. That doesn't change when Calhoun leaves." "Roy might not understand that," she said. "Or he might believe he has time before it advances. Or," Cole said very carefully, "he found something that he thinks makes the inquiry irrelevant." She looked at him directly. "What would do that?" she said. Cole picked up a letter from his desk. She hadn't noticed it when she came in. It was sitting on top of the correspondence pile with the particular placement of something that had been set there deliberately to be seen. "This came this morning," he said. "Hand-delivered. No courier I recognize." She looked at it. He held it out. She took it and read it. It was short. 8 lines. No signature. It said, "Mr. Cole, you should know that the man you've been protecting is not the only one with a history. Ask Miss Calloway about the hotel in Laramie. Ask her about the money that went missing from the accounts in November of 1880. Ask her why she left Laramie without notice and without a reference. Some stories have more than one side. A friend." She read it twice. Then she looked up. Cole was watching her face. "Well," she said. "Tell me about Laramie," he said. His voice was entirely neutral, not doubting, not accusing. The voice of someone who has decided they want to hear the truth and intends to hear it all the way through without interrupting. "I worked at a hotel in Laramie from September 1879 to December 1880, she said. The head bookkeeper at the time was a man named Gerald Marsh. In November 1880, Gerald Marsh embezzled $400 from the hotel accounts and disappeared. I was the junior bookkeeper. When the discrepancy was discovered, I was the one left in the office." She kept her voice level. "I was questioned. The hotel owner determined that the discrepancy was too sophisticated for someone of my junior position to have engineered alone, and that the pattern of the missing funds pointed to Gerald Marsh's access rather than mine. I was not charged with anything. But the hotel closed within 2 months of the embezzlement, and I left with a verbal reference, but nothing written because there was no one left to write it." Cole listened to every word. "And Roy knows about this," he said. "He must have found someone from Laramie, or found the records." She looked at the letter. He's been researching me the way I research numbers, looking for the gap. He found a gap. He found a circumstance that can be made to look like a gap if you tell it the wrong way. She looked at Cole directly. I didn't take that money. Gerald Marsh took that money. But I was in the building, I had access to the accounts, and the hotel closed before anyone produced a written record of the investigation's conclusion. So, there's no documentation of your clearance? No. Cole was quiet for a moment. That's what he's been doing this week, he said, almost to himself. That's why he went quiet. He wasn't retreating, he was digging. He found the one thing he could use, she said. The one period of my life where the official record is incomplete. And he thinks if he introduces this story here to the right people before I can counter it, it casts doubt on your character in a way that undermines your testimony in the federal inquiry. She nodded. He's going to go to Calhoun, she said, or write to him. He's going to say that the woman making allegations against him has her own history of financial misconduct. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Does he have evidence? He said. Actual evidence, not just the story. I don't know what he found, she said. But even the story without evidence does damage if it reaches Calhoun before I do. Then we need to reach Calhoun first. Cole? She stopped. If this comes out and people here start asking questions about Laramie, it doesn't matter that I'm innocent. The doubt is enough. You know that. I know, he said. It's what he does. He doesn't need proof. He just needs doubt. Yes. Cole picked up the letter. Which is why we're not waiting for him to introduce it. He looked at her. Write to Calhoun today. Full account of Laramie, everything you just told me. Every detail. Get ahead of it. And if Calhoun starts to wonder... Calhoun is a man who built a federal career on distinguishing between documented conduct and planted doubt, Cole said. When he receives your account of Laramie complete detailed voluntary, sent before Roy says a word to him, and then receives Roy's version, which is reactive and strategically timed, he will know exactly what he's looking at. She looked at him. You're very certain, she said. I'm certain about the difference between a woman who leads with the truth and a man who deploys selected facts as weapons, he said. Calhoun has seen both before. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood. I need paper. He was already moving to the desk. She wrote the Laramie account in 40 minutes faster than the original statement, because she had lived with this particular history long enough that the details came without effort. Gerald Marsh. The accounts, the November discrepancy, the investigation, the conclusion, the closure of the hotel. Every name, every date, every specific she could produce. She brought it to Cole when she was done. He read it once. There's nothing here that contradicts what you told me, he said. Because there's nothing to contradict, she said. It's what happened. He folded the letter and addressed it to Calhoun's Denver office. Douglas will write it to the telegraph station, he said. It'll be wired today. She nodded. Cole held the letter for a moment before handing it to her. There's something else I want to do, he said. What? I want to find Gerald Marsh. She stared at him. Marsh has been gone for 3 years. He's been gone from Laramie for 3 years, Cole said. Men who embezzle from a hotel and flee don't usually flee to the moon. They go somewhere else and start something else. He looked at her steadily. I have contacts in 3 territorial cities who know the business community well enough to have heard of a man matching that description. If Marsh is findable, I can find him. And if you find him, a statement from Gerald Marsh confirming that he acted alone and that you had no knowledge of or involvement in the embezzlement is worth more than anything else in this situation, Cole said. She looked at him. You would do that, she said, on top of everything else. It's not on top of everything else, he said. It's part of the same thing. She looked away for a moment. Yay. Why? She said quietly, not challenging, genuinely asking. You have a business to run. You have obligations that have nothing to do with me. You've already done more than Nora. He said her name the way he had been saying it for weeks. Not soft, not performed, just direct. The way he said everything. I'm going to tell you something plainly because you deserve plain things. She looked at him. I am not helping you because it's the right thing to do, he said. I mean, it is the right thing to do, but that's not why. I'm helping you because somewhere in the last 5 weeks, you have become the most important person in my daily life, and what happens to you matters to me the way things only matter when they're... He stopped, adjusted. When they're not about obligation. She held very still. Cole, I'm not asking anything of you, he said immediately. I know where we are. I know what you've been through, and I know the ground isn't solid yet. I'm telling you the truth, because you trust truth, and you deserve to know it. She looked at him for a long, careful moment. The ground is more solid than it was, she said finally. It gets more solid every day. Something moved in his face. That's enough, he said. For right now, that's enough. She picked up the letter to Calhoun. Find Gerald Marsh, she said. Please. I'll start today. Roy Briggs made his move on Wednesday. Not to Calhoun, or at least not first. He started closer to home, which was either a miscalculation or a deliberate choice to build local credibility before going federal. He went to Henry Burke at the bank. Burke told Cole about it within the hour, because Burke had been briefed, and because Burke, who had known Garrett Cole for 11 years and Roy Briggs for 6 weeks, was not a man who confused the two. He told me a story about a hotel in Laramie, Burke said, sitting across from Cole, with the expression of a man who is about to enjoy being the person who delivers a particular piece of information. About missing accounts, about a bookkeeper who left under suspicious circumstances. What did you tell him? Cole said. I told him I appreciated him sharing his concerns, and that I would absolutely look into it. Burke smiled slightly. And then I asked him if he had documentation of any of this, and he said he had sources he was in the process of contacting, and I told him I'd need documentation before I could consider it seriously. He doesn't have documentation, Cole said. He has a story, Burke agreed. A story is not documentation. He paused. He also told me that your interest in Miss Calloway was less protective than it appeared. He implied that a man who would go to the lengths you've gone to for an employee might be that there might be a personal dimension that Miss Calloway wasn't entirely in control of. The quality of Cole's stillness changed. Burke held up a hand. I told him that in 20 years of dealing with people's finances, I had developed a reasonable sense of who was credible and who wasn't, and that he had reached the limit of what I was prepared to hear without evidence. And he left. Burke stood. Garrett, he's getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. I'm counting on it, Cole said. The mistake came on Thursday evening. She heard it from Douglas, who heard it from Pierce, who had been on the main street when it happened. Roy Briggs had gone into the Silver Crown Bar at 8 o'clock in the evening and had, in front of 7 customers and 2 bartenders, announced loudly that Nora Calloway was a woman with a criminal history who had stolen money from her previous employer, and that Garrett Cole was protecting her because he had inappropriate personal interests in keeping her under his roof and under his influence. He had used the word control. He had said that Nora Calloway was not free, that she was a woman being kept by a powerful man who had replaced one trap with another. He had spoken for approximately 4 minutes before one of the bartenders asked him to leave. He had left. By 9 o'clock, the account had reached Cole's office through 3 separate channels. By 9:15, it had reached Nora. She sat in her room and read Douglas's account of what had been said. She read it twice. Then she stood up. She was not trembling. She noticed that specifically she checked the way she had learned to check, because trembling meant the fear had gotten into her hands, and her hands needed to be steady. They were steady. She was not afraid. She was something else entirely. She went upstairs. Cole was at his desk with Douglas and Pierce both in the room, the posture of a council rather than an office. He looked at her face when she appeared, and something in his expression shifted. "You heard," he said. "I heard." She came fully into the room. "He called me kept. He said I replaced one trap with another." "Yes." "He said you have inappropriate personal interests." "Yes." "And he said this in a public room with 7 witnesses." "Yes." Cole's voice was very even. She looked at Douglas, at Pierce. "Leave us for a moment," she said. They looked at Cole. He nodded. They left. She stood across the desk from Cole in the quiet room. "He just committed slander in front of witnesses," she said. "In your establishment. About both of us." "Yes, he did." "That's not staying inside the line." "No," Cole said. "It is not." She looked at him directly. "What does that give us?" "It gives Granger something he can act on without my letter to the governor," Cole said. "Defamation of character. Public false statement. Witnessed by 7 people in a licensed establishment." "Will Granger act?" "Tonight," Cole said. "Granger will act, because I'm going to his office in 20 minutes." She held his gaze. "I'm coming with you," she said. He looked at her carefully. "Nora?" "He called me kept," she said. "He said I'm not free. He said I replaced one trap with another." Her voice was entirely steady. "I want to stand in the sheriff's office and be the person who files the complaint. Not you, me." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his hat. "Then we go together," he said. Sheriff Granger was not pleased to receive visitors at 9:30 on a Thursday evening. He was considerably less pleased when he understood the nature of the visit and what the evening's events in the Silver Crown Bar meant for his open file and his relationship with Garrett Cole's letter to the territorial governor. He listened to Cole's account, then he looked at Nora. "You want to file this formally," he said. "The defamation." "I want to file the defamation," she said, "and I want it added to the federal inquiry file. And I want it on record that the statements he made tonight are false, that they have been preemptively addressed in a communication sent to Agent Calhoun yesterday, and that they represent an escalation of a documented pattern." She paused. "And I want Roy Briggs brought in tonight for a formal conversation on the record about what happens when the behavior he's been engaging in crosses from harassment into actionable public falsehood." Granger looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Cole. Then he looked back at her. "You're thorough," he said. "I'm a bookkeeper," she said. "I don't like gaps in the record." Granger almost smiled. Almost. He picked up his pen. Roy Briggs was brought to the sheriff's office at 10:30. He did not expect Nora to be there. She saw it in his face, the 1 second of genuine surprise before the mask reassembled. She watched him look at her, and then at Cole, and then at Granger, and process the particular geometry of the room. Nora and Cole seated Granger behind his desk, 2 deputies at the door. No gaps, no margins, no space between the walls. He sat down. Granger read him the formal language of the complaint, the slander, the witnesses, the documentation, the federal inquiry. Roy listened with the stillness of a man doing very rapid arithmetic. "Do you have anything to say to these allegations?" Granger said. Roy looked at Nora. She looked back at him. She did not look away. He had told her once in a hallway that now felt like 100 years ago that he had noticed she never screamed, that she went quiet when she was scared, that she had been going quiet for 2 years and nobody noticed. She was not quiet now. She was sitting in a sheriff's office at 10:30 at night, looking directly at the man who had followed her across 3 towns and 7 years. And she was not trembling, and she was not invisible, and she was not going anywhere. Roy looked at her face, and something happened. Not collapse, not remorse, not the dramatic reckoning of a man suddenly understanding the damage he had done. Something smaller, and in some ways more significant recognition. The recognition of a man who has run a system for so long that he has stopped being able to imagine it failing, encountering the evidence that it has failed. He looked at her and saw that she was not afraid of him. "I want to speak to a lawyer," he said. "You're not under arrest," Granger said. "You're being informed of the formal complaint and the addition to the federal file. You can respond to the federal inquiry through whatever legal representation you choose to obtain." "Then I have nothing further to say. That's your right." Granger looked at him steadily. "I want you to be aware that the terms of your remaining in Copper Ridge have changed. You are not to approach Miss Calloway, the Silver Crown Hotel, or any employee thereof. You are not to make further public statements about Miss Calloway's character or Mr. Cole's conduct. Violation of these terms will result in immediate detention pending federal consultation." He paused. "Is that clear?" Roy looked at Granger, looked at Cole, looked at Nora. "Yes," he said. "Good," said Granger. "You can go." Roy stood. He picked up his hat, and then he did something she had not expected. He looked at her, not with the easy smile, not with the certainty, not with the manufactured concern that had been his standard expression when he wanted to appear sympathetic. He looked at her with something she couldn't fully name. Not regret exactly, not apology, something older than either of those things. Recognition again. But this time pointed inward. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. The room was very quiet. Granger set down his pen. "I'll update Calhoun's file in the morning," he said. "Thank you, Dan," Cole said. Nora stood. Her legs were steady. She was mildly surprised by that, and then not surprised at all, because she had been steadier for weeks and had simply been waiting to trust the steadiness. She was trusting it now. Roy Briggs left Copper Ridge on Saturday morning, not the stage this time. He hired a private wagon, whether because he couldn't face the public platform or because he had something he didn't want a stage driver to observe, nobody knew. He left early before the town was fully awake with his single bag and the closed expression of a man who has run out of calculations. Douglas confirmed it at 7 o'clock. Pierce confirmed it at 7:15, having ridden the east road far enough to verify the direction. By 7:30, Nora was sitting at the small table in her room with a cup of coffee, knowing that Roy Briggs was on a wagon headed east, carrying a federal inquiry file with his name on it, and the first thing in 7 years that he hadn't been able to dismantle. She sat with it for a long time, not celebrating that felt wrong or premature or somehow beside the point. Roy leaving didn't undo 2 years. It didn't give Frances Alderton her position back in Salida or restore what Jane Whitmore had lost in Cedar Fork. It didn't put back the months she had spent going quiet and invisible and carefully alone. But it was something. It was the thing she had stopped believing was possible, not in moments of dramatic despair, but in the quiet, grinding way that long survival of a hard thing erodes belief. The slow loss of faith that the situation would ever be different. It was different now. Pearl knocked at 8 o'clock. "He's gone," she said from the doorway. "I know," Nora said. Pearl stood there for a moment. "Are you all right?" she said. Nora looked at her. At this young woman who had replaced candles in a hallway and brought critical intelligence and delivered ginger cookies through her mother and stood in a lobby without being asked and had been for 5 weeks more genuinely useful than anyone twice her age and experience. "Yes," Nora said. "I am." Pearl smiled, the full version, the unguarded one she deployed when she wasn't trying to be professional. "Good," she said. "Mr. Cole asked if you'd come up when you're ready." "Tell him I'll be up in 10 minutes. Pearl left. Nora finished her coffee. She looked at her room, the simple furnishings, the books, the quilt from Mrs. Chandler's, the ledger on the table. Then she went upstairs. Cole was at the window when she came in. He turned when he heard her. They looked at each other across the room. "He's gone," she said. "He's gone," Cole agreed. "The inquiry follows him. Wherever he goes. Frances Alderton's statement is in the file. And yours. And the letter he sent. And the fire. And the public defamation." Cole's voice was level. He will not be able to start over somewhere new and do this again without the file catching up to him. She nodded. She walked to the window and stood beside him. They were quiet for a moment, looking out at Copper Ridge, doing its ordinary Saturday morning things, the market stalls, setting up the wagons on the main road, the particular unhurried quality of a town that didn't know what had resolved itself in its margins. "I found Gerald Marsh," Cole said. She looked at him sharply. "When? What?" "Yesterday evening. I didn't want to tell you until today." He turned to face her. "He's in Cheyenne, running a dry goods operation. My contact there knows him slightly." He paused. "He agreed to provide a written statement. He said, and I'm telling you his words exactly, I've wondered for 3 years if what I did to that girl would catch up to her. I'm glad to have the chance to set it right." She stared at him. "He said that?" "Word for word." She turned back to the window. She pressed one hand flat against the glass, not cold. The morning had warmed it and stood with Gerald Marsh's words moving through her. "I've wondered for 3 years if what I did to that girl would catch up to her. 3 years." Gerald Marsh had spent 3 years carrying the weight of what his actions had cost her somewhere in Cheyenne, and she had spent the same 3 years carrying a gap in her record that Roy had found and tried to use as a weapon. The things people carry without knowing the other person is carrying the other side of it. "I need to write to him," she said. "I thought you might," Cole said. "I have his address." She turned to face him. They were standing close the way they had been standing for weeks in the specific proximity of two people who have been careful about something and are starting to be less careful. "Cole," she said. "Nora, I told you the ground was getting more solid." "You did. I want you to know—" She stopped. Started again. "I have been afraid for 2 years. Not just of Roy. Of trusting the wrong thing again. Of building something and having it turn out to be what it looked like from the outside rather than what it actually was." She held his gaze. "I've been testing this. Quietly. The way I test numbers when I need to be sure. And," he said, "quiet. And it keeps balancing," she said. "Every time I check it, it balances." Something moved in his face, the careful, rationed expression she had been learning to read for 5 weeks, the expression of a man who had decided that certain feelings were worth protecting until they were worth sharing. "Nora," he said, "I have been waiting very patiently." She almost laughed. It came out as something between a breath and a smile. "I know you have," she said. You've been very good at it." "I've been motivated," he said. She looked at him, this man who had stood in a hallway at 6:30 in the morning and said 3 words that changed everything, who had built a file and written letters and found Gerald Marsh and held a line and waited, who had said yes before she finished asking and meant it all the way down. "I'm not invisible anymore," she said. "You never were," he said. "You were the only one who couldn't see it." She reached out and put her hand on his arm. The first deliberate touch between them. Not accidental proximity, not the brush of passing in a doorway, but a specific choice. His hand came up and covered hers. Warm. Steady. The hand of a man who had decided exactly what he was doing. They stood at the window in the Saturday morning light, and outside Copper Ridge went on being ordinary and unaware, and neither of them said anything for a while, because neither of them needed to. 3 months later, in the deep cold of January, a letter arrived at the Silver Crown for Nora Calloway. It was from Agent Calhoun's office in Denver. She read it at her desk with Cole standing at the window behind her, having acquired the habit of being in the same room without requiring it to be about anything specific. The letter said that the federal inquiry into Roy Briggs's conduct across territorial jurisdictions had been formally advanced. That additional testimony had been gathered from 2 women in Kansas whose accounts aligned with the established pattern. That Roy Briggs had been formally restricted from certain occupations and geographic areas pending ongoing review. That his ability to repeat the pattern he had maintained for 7 years had been, in Calhoun's careful federal language, substantially curtailed. She read it twice. Then she read it a 3rd time. Then she set it down. Well, Cole said. She looked up at him. It's not everything, she said. He's not in a prison cell. He hasn't lost 7 years the way the women he did this to lost months and positions and the ability to trust people. No, Cole said. It's not everything. But it's something. It's something real, he said. She looked at the letter. She thought about Frances Alderton, who had written, I want her to know she is not imagining it. She thought about Jane Whitmore, whose name she knew, but whose face she would never see. She thought about the 2 women in Kansas, whose names she still didn't know, whose accounts had aligned with hers, who had each been alone in their version of this same shape of thing. She picked up a sheet of paper. She began to write. What are you doing? Cole said. Writing to Frances Alderton, she said. To tell her. He was quiet for a moment. Then, tell her it mattered. What she did. I'm going to, she said. She wrote for several minutes. Cole didn't speak, which was one of the things she had come to value most about him, the specific quality of his silence, the way it was never absence, but a kind of presence, a companionship without demand. When she finished, she set the letter aside to be sealed and posted. She looked out the window at the January street. I've been thinking about something, she said. Tell me. I want to keep the accounts, she said. I want to keep the ledgers. But I've been thinking that there's... She paused. There's a woman at Mrs. Chandler's boarding house. She arrived 2 weeks ago. I've seen her at breakfast twice. She has the same way of coming into a room. Cole was listening. The same way I had, she said, of trying not to exist in it. She turned to look at him. I don't know her situation, she said. I don't know if it's what I think it is, but I know that 2 years ago, I would have given almost anything for someone to notice that about me and do something about it. So notice, Cole said. I'm going to speak to her, Nora said. Tomorrow morning. Do you want company? She considered it. No, she said. I think this should come from me alone. He nodded. Then it will. She stood. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face. This face she had been reading for 3 months and still found new things in the careful rationed expressions, the things he said because they were true, rather than because they would land well, the particular quality of his attention, which was the kind that made you feel not watched, but seen. Thank you, she said. For the last time. I don't want to keep thanking you because it starts to sound like I think what you did was extraordinary, and I'd rather it become ordinary. His mouth curved slightly. What does ordinary look like? He said. Like this, she said. Like whatever this is. I can do ordinary, he said. I know you can, she said. That's why I'm staying. She took his hand and held it for a moment. Then she let go and went back to her desk and opened her ledger, and Cole turned back to his window, and the Silver Crown did its January morning business around them both. And Nora Calloway, who had come to Copper Ridge invisible and careful and alone, who had learned to go quiet instead of scream. Who had survived 2 years of being followed and disbelieved, and told to be more careful about encouraging men, opened her ledger to a clean page. She picked up her pen. She wrote the date. She began a new column of figures. She was not invisible. She was not quiet. She was not alone. And outside the Silver Crown, on a cold January morning in Colorado Territory, 1884, the world was going on. The way the world always goes on, oblivious to the small and enormous things that happen in its margins. The ordinary acts of courage that don't look like courage, because they happen in offices and hallways, and sheriff's waiting rooms and letters written at small desks late at night. The world went on, and so did she. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she had finally steadily, carefully, number by number and truth by truth, rescued herself. And she had let someone stand beside her while she did it. That she had learned was not weakness. That was the bravest thing she had ever done.